The HOA president chose a Saturday morning to make her point. I was halfway through changing the oil in my truck when her SUV rolled up my gravel driveway, tires crunching slow and deliberate. She stepped out, holding a certified envelope like it was a court order. 30 days, she said, loud enough for my neighbor across the fence to hear. You owe $18,400 in retroactive compliance penalties and unpaid assessments. If it's not paid, we initiate foreclosure. Foreclosure. On my farmhouse, she kept her posture straight, chin lifted, performing authority for whoever might be watching. I wiped my hands on a rag, walked over, and accepted the envelope. No argument, no raised voice. I even thanked her for bringing it personally. She mistook silence for submission. Most people do. What she didn't know, what no one on that board knew, was that 6 months earlier I'd purchased the debt their HOA depends on to exist. When she said, "We'll take your farmhouse," I almost corrected her. Almost. The farmhouse isn't some investment property I picked up on a whim. My grandfather built it in 1958 with lumber he hauled in himself. 2 bedrooms at first, a narrow porch, and a barn set back where the soil stays dry. My father added the 3rd bedroom after I was born and reinforced the beams when the roof sagged one winter. Every board has a fingerprint on it. Back then, this was open county land, fields and tree lines. Over the years, the subdivision crept closer, cul-de-sacs replacing corn rows. Eventually, a developer redrew the boundary lines, and my parcel was folded into the HOA through what they called a minor adjustment. Minor for them. I'm not anti-community. I keep the fence straight. I mow every week. The gravel driveway stays graded, but I don't tolerate overreach dressed up as governance. I've spent 25 years in commercial lending and distressed asset acquisition. Nothing flashy. I read covenants for a living. I understand leverage. When my father was dying, he told me, "Never let paperwork bully you off land you've paid for." So when that letter hit my hand, I didn't panic. I started reading. She'd been elected 8 months earlier. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, always dressed like she was stepping into a listing appointment. Her campaign platform was simple: raise property values, protect the brand of the neighborhood. She said it often enough that people started repeating it back to her. Enforcement doubled within weeks of her taking office. First, it was my barn. She claimed the weathered wood violated updated aesthetic guidelines, even though it predated the subdivision by decades. Then it was my gravel driveway, inconsistent with community standards. After that came a notice about agricultural use inconsistency, as if 2 horses and a hayloft were a zoning crisis. The fines escalated fast. Each letter carried firmer language than the last. Administrative fees, daily penalties, references to compliance committees. At one board meeting, she spoke about non-compliant legacy properties dragging values down. She never said my name, but every head in the room turned slightly in my direction. She performed authority with steady eye contact and rehearsed pauses. I documented everything: dates, language, procedural defects. Then the certified letter arrived, and this time the word foreclosure was bolded. All residents invited. I spread the breakdown across my kitchen table that night. $18,400. According to their ledger, they had recalculated 5 years of dues based on a revised classification of my property. They applied it retroactively, as if the past could be edited. On top of that came daily compounding fines for continuing non-compliance tied to the barn and driveway. Then administrative charges. Then legal processing fees that looked suspiciously preemptive. It wasn't a missed payment. It was engineered pressure. I drafted a formal dispute letter the next morning. Calm tone. Specific citations. The covenants limited retroactive enforcement and capped discretionary fines. I requested a hearing and an itemized accounting. Their response came through HOA counsel on heavy letterhead. The language was polite but dismissive. They stood by the assessment. If payment wasn't received promptly, they would proceed with lien remedies. 2 weeks later, a lien appeared on my title. I confirmed it myself at the county recorder's office. Clean filing. Technically valid. Neighbors began asking careful questions at the mailbox. Everything okay? The tone wasn't gossip, it was caution. No one wanted to be next. I felt the weight of it, not fear. Pressure has a different texture. This felt like confirmation that the situation wasn't about paint colors or gravel. At the next board meeting, they voted to proceed with foreclosure review if the balance remained unpaid after 30 days. She closed the discussion with, "We will protect this community's standards." The room nodded. That's when I realized arguing compliance was the wrong battlefield. The notice of intent to foreclose arrived by certified mail on a Thursday afternoon. Formal language, statutory references, a deadline printed in bold. That was the line. Not because I was afraid of losing the house, but because escalation changes the rules. Once foreclosure enters the room, it's no longer about compliance, it's about control. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning. Not to challenge the lien, not to file anything in response. I went to confirm something I already suspected. 6 months earlier, during one of my routine reviews of the HOA's publicly available financial disclosures, I'd noticed the pattern: ballooning maintenance costs, rising homeowner delinquencies, and a sizable private loan used to renovate the clubhouse and pool area. The terms weren't catastrophic, but they were tight, too tight for instability. When the original lender offloaded a portfolio of distressed community loans, I recognized the address. I purchased that note through an LLC. They believed they were squeezing a single homeowner. In reality, I held the debt secured by their common property, and their loan agreement had a clause they clearly hadn't reread. The master loan wasn't complicated. It was secured by the HOA's common areas, the clubhouse, pool, greenbelts, and backed by projected assessment revenue. In simple terms, homeowners paid dues. Dues serviced the debt, and the amenities justified the dues. A closed loop. But buried midway through the agreement was a stability clause. If the association entered litigation that materially threatened solvency or initiated foreclosure actions, likely to trigger member disputes, impairing assessment collection, the lender reserved the right to accelerate repayment or assume temporary financial oversight. Foreclosure against a long-standing homeowner with documented covenant disputes qualified as destabilizing, especially once neighbors began questioning enforcement and hinting at selective treatment. I had copies of meeting minutes, emails, the lien filing, public record. Still, I didn't move recklessly. I retained an attorney who specialized in community association finance. I wanted confirmation, not optimism. He read the clause twice and leaned back. "It's enforceable," he said. "Clean language." They signed it. I sent a formal notice of concern in my capacity as managing member of the LLC holding the note. The letter cited governance, instability, litigation exposure, and risk to revenue continuity. Their initial response was polite, professional. They addressed me as the lender, unaware of the connection. Then I sent a second letter. Conditional forbearance, contingent upon immediate withdrawal of foreclosure proceedings against my property. After that, silence. The next board meeting was suddenly listed as executive session only. The next open meeting was held in the clubhouse they'd financed with my paper. I arrived early, wearing the same work boots I'd had on the day she stood in my driveway. In my hand was a simple leather folder. No stack of binders, no theatrics. She opened the meeting with a tight smile and a brief reference to ongoing financial restructuring discussions. The phrase hung in the air, vague but defensive. I waded through budget updates and landscaping contracts. When homeowner comment period opened, I stood. "My name is Daniel Harper," I said evenly. "Lot 3B, a few heads turned. I'm also the managing member of Red Oak Holdings, LLC, the current holder of the association's master note." The shift in the room was physical. Posture changed. Whispering started low and spread outward. I didn't raise my voice. I outlined facts: the outstanding principal balance, the interest rate, the clause permitting acceleration in the event of destabilizing litigation, the lender's right to conduct a forensic review of governance practices affecting revenue continuity. The notice of concern already on file. No threats. Just structure. Her attorney asked, carefully, whether I had documentation of assignment. I walked to the front table and handed him the recorded transfer, stamped by the county. He studied it longer than he needed to. The realization moved across the room in stages. The authority enforcing liens was itself leveraged, and the leverage had changed hands. She attempted to regain footing. "This feels like intimidation," she said, measured but strained. I met her gaze. "I have no interest in destabilizing this community. I do have interest in preventing selective enforcement actions that create financial risk." Then I placed a second document on the table, a drafted mutual resolution. Immediate withdrawal of the lien against my property. Full dismissal of assessed fines. Written acknowledgement of grandfathered agricultural status. Formation of a governance review committee with resident oversight. In exchange, Red Oak Holdings would extend forbearance on the master loan. No acceleration. Structured repayment adjustments to ease monthly pressure. The board requested a recess. Homeowners leaned toward one another, whispering. For the first time since her election, she wasn't directing the room. She was reacting to it. When they returned, her tone was different. The board voted that night to suspend foreclosure proceedings and enter formal mediation. The language was careful, but the direction was clear. Within 3 weeks, the lien against my property was released. The fines were voided in full. A written acknowledgement of my property's grandfathered agricultural status was recorded with the county. It wasn't dramatic. No apologies. Just amended paperwork. 3 months later, the president resigned for what the newsletter called personal reasons. The statement was brief. The tone subdued. I never accelerated the loan. Instead, I restructured it, extended maturity, adjusted payments, required quarterly financial transparency reports to residents. The HOA remained intact. The pool stayed open. The lights stayed on. But oversight was no longer symbolic. One evening not long after, I walked the property line at dusk. The air smelled like cut hay, and the barn cast a long shadow across the pasture. My grandfather had framed that structure by hand. My father had reinforced it. Their work still held. This was never about humiliating anyone. It was about a principle. Authority isn't ownership. Paperwork cuts both ways. They told me to pay up or get out. I chose to read the fine print.